The moment I stepped outside and saw bright yellow lines painted across my driveway, I knew something was off. At first, I figured some road crew had screwed up, but then I followed the lines to a freshly planted sign at the edge of my property. Community parking, HOA approved. My stomach twisted. A small note taped beneath it bore the Male Homeowners Association's letterhead. I ripped it off and read. As per recent amendments to the community guidelines, your driveway has been designated as shared public parking for the neighborhood to accommodate rising parking demands. Compliance is mandatory. Unauthorized obstruction will result in fines. I laughed, had to be a prank, some idiot's idea of a joke, but the paint was crisp, the sign professional, and the note official. This was no gag. My blood boiled. Who in their right mind thought they could turn my driveway, my private property, paid for with my money, listed on my deed, into a public lot? I stormed inside, grabbed my phone, and dialed the HOA, ready to rip someone apart. The automated system nearly made me snap my phone in half. Thank you for calling the Male Homeowners Association. Please listen carefully as our menu options have changed. I jabbed through the prompts until a live voice answered. HOA office, this is Melanie. How may I assist you? Clenching my teeth, I said, you can start by explaining why my driveway's suddenly public parking without my permission. Silence, then a click, and a new voice oozed through, smug, dripping with condescension. Ah, Mr. Harrison, I was wondering when you'd call. This is Corinne Mallister, HOA president. I assume you've seen the updates to your property. My grip tightened. Updates? You mean stealing my driveway and pretending it's legal? She smirked through the line. It's not stealing, Mr. Harrison. It's a community decision. The board voted unanimously. The neighborhood needed parking and your driveway in a convenient spot. I let out a bitter laugh. So you all met behind closed doors and decided my property's public. That's not how this works. Corinne sighed dramatically. The HOA has the right to allocate community resources as necessary for a balanced neighborhood. I nearly crushed the phone. My driveway's not a community resource, it's mine, she chuckled. Not anymore, adjust accordingly. Towing vehicles from a designated community parking zone will result in violations, and fines accrue daily if you refuse to comply. Oh, and the decision's final, no appeal process. Have a great day. The call disconnected with a sharp beep. I stood there, mind racing at the audacity. They weren't getting away with this. An hour later, a white sedan rolled in like it owned the place. The driver, some guy from 2 streets over, stepped out with grocery bags and nodded. Hey man, thanks for letting us use the spot. HOA made a great call. My fists clenched, pulse pounding. This wasn't happening. I wouldn't let my home become a free-for-all. Without thinking, I called a towing company. I need a vehicle removed from my private property. The dispatcher hesitated after taking my address. Wait, you said private property? You sure it's not a public zone? My jaw tightened. It's my driveway, private as it gets. Another pause. Sir, we've been instructed by the HOA not to tow from that address. They've designated it community parking and sent a notice last week. We legally can't touch it. I slammed the phone down. They'd covered every angle, leaving me no options, or so they thought. Over the next few hours, more cars piled in, drivers flashing oblivious smiles. One woman even said, "It's so nice of you to share, dear," as she waddled off. My driveway, my property, was now a glorified parking lot, and I was expected to take it. But as I watched strangers claim my space, something shifted. Anger turned to focus. If they wanted public parking, I'd make it the most unbearable spot they'd ever seen. I didn't sleep that night, planned, researched, made calls, sketched ideas. By sunrise, I had a strategy to reclaim what was mine. The next morning, my driveway looked worse than ever, cars crammed in haphazardly, and the HOA had upped the ante with a new sign. Community parking violators will be fined. The gall of it nearly set me off. My own property, labeled like I had no claim to it. Then I saw one car blocking my garage. I couldn't even get my truck out. My pulse hammered as I marched over, ready to confront someone, but the street was empty, just a row of vehicles from entitled neighbors treating my space like a public perk. I called the HOA again, barely holding it together. After the robotic prompts, Melanie answered, "Male HOA, how may I help you?" I gritted my teeth. "This is Mr. Harrison. I need Corinne Mallister now." A long pause, then her chipper tone. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Mallister's in a meeting. Would you like to leave a message?" I let out a humorless laugh. "Yeah, tell her if my driveway isn't cleared in an hour, I'll press charges for trespassing," she faltered. Sir, as per the recent amendments, your driveway's community property for parking. There's nothing Mrs. Mallister can do. My knuckles cracked. Nothing. This is my property, not yours. Her voice stayed saccharine. I understand your frustration, but the board's decision is final. You should have attended the meeting if you had concerns. I hung up before I lost it completely. There was no reasoning with them. They decided my land was theirs and weren't budging. Whispers started among neighbors. Some shook their heads in sympathy, others backed the HOA. One guy even told me I was selfish for not sharing when parking was tight. Later, a letter arrived, stamped with the HOA seal. I tore it open, $500 fine for obstruction of community resources. My crime? Calling a tow truck without approval. I laughed bitterly. $500 for trying to clear my own driveway. They were testing how far they could push me. But they'd misjudged me. I wasn't some pushover who'd cave. That afternoon, I dug into property laws, scouring HOA rules and rights. What I found fueled my anger. My deed proved my driveway was private property, and while HOAs could enforce community standards, they couldn't seize land outright. They'd overstepped. Big time. I called Tom, my neighbor who'd lived here longer than anyone and despised the HOA as much as I did. Tom, I need advice. The HOA's taking my driveway and I need options. He chuckled. They finally got to you, huh? What they do? I laid it out, the sudden rule, the fines, the parking, the sign. He whistled low. Damn, they're getting bolder. So what do? I asked. Legally, they can't take your property, he said, but they'll make your life hell if you don't comply. They've done this before, pick on someone till they break. If you want to win, you've got to be smarter. They've got power, but it's got limits, and I know how to push them right to the edge. I listened as he outlined a plan, bold, risky, and crazy enough to work. If they wanted my driveway public, I'd make it the most inconvenient public space imaginable. That night, staring at the cars clogging my driveway, this stopped being just about parking. It was about the HOA's overreach. They thought they could bully me into submission. They were wrong. Morning came with fresh determination. I wouldn't just fight, I'd make them regret this stunt. I stepped onto my porch, taking in the mess. Cars parked sloppily, some nearly blocking the sidewalk, neighbors milling about like it was a mall lot. One guy leaned against his car, sipping coffee, unbothered by trespassing on my land. I clenched my jaw, staying calm, not for long. I got in my truck, carefully backing out since my garage was still blocked, and drove to a landscaping supply company across town. At the counter, a bored clerk barely looked up. Help you? Yeah, I said, I need a bulk order of sand, a lot. He raised an eyebrow, setting his phone down. How much? I showed him my sketch enough to bury my driveway. He whistled. That's a hell of a lot, you sure? I grinned. Oh, I'm sure. We arranged delivery for that afternoon. Driving back, excitement replaced frustration. The HOA thought I'd roll over. They were about to learn otherwise. When I got home, I parked on the street, my driveway still a chaotic mess of cars, and waited, watching the clock. A few hours later, heavy machinery rumbled down the road. I stepped outside as a landscaping truck pulled up, its dump bed brimming with golden sand. The driver hopped out, adjusting his cap. You sure you want this dumped right here? He asked, eyeing the packed driveway. I nodded. Right here, he shrugged. All right, your call. The truck tilted and a cascade of sand poured out, burying tires and setting off car alarms. Dust clouded the air as my driveway transformed into a beach resort nightmare. When the truck emptied, I planted a sign in the middle, private sandbox, no vehicles allowed. I barely had time to step back before the outrage hit. A woman stormed from her car, staring at the sand, swallowing her tires. What the hell is this? She screeched. I crossed my arms. Just a little landscaping project. Nothing in the HOA rules against sandpits, right? Her face reddened as she yanked out her phone. I'm calling the HOA, I grinned. Go ahead. Within 20 minutes, Corinne Mallister herself arrived, looking like she'd bitten a lemon. Her high heels sank into the sand as she stomped up my walkway. Mr. Harrison, what is the meaning of this? I kept my tone pleasant. It's a sandpit, a beautiful community addition, don't you think? She stared, incredulous. You need to remove this immediately. Why? I shrugged. It's my property, isn't it? Her nostrils flared. Your driveway's designated community parking. This is a violation. I pulled out my phone, showing the HOA rulebook. Actually, there's no rule against landscaping modifications. Technically, it's still accessible, just sandy. Her face darkened, realizing she had no quick comeback. She whipped out her phone, making calls, probably scrambling for a counterattack. A man in a suit, likely a board member, joined her, whispering urgently before turning to me. The HOA will issue a formal violation for obstructing community property. On what grounds? I asked. He hesitated. You can't just dump sand in a parking zone. You mean my driveway, the one I own? Karen clenched her fists. This isn't over, Mr. Harrison, I smirked. Oh, I know. She stormed off, barking orders, the board member glaring as he followed. Over the next few days, the sandpit became a neighborhood spectacle. Kids played in it, neighbors snapped photos, some even brought beach chairs to mock the HOA. It turned into a running joke at their expense. The madder they got, the funnier it was. But I knew they wouldn't let it slide. Less than 24 hours later, another letter arrived, aggressive, dripping with threats. Multiple violations, obstruction of community property, failure to comply with aesthetics, and creating an unauthorized hazard. They demanded the sand's removal within 72 hours or I'd face $500 daily fines. I sat at my kitchen table, sipping coffee, laughing at their desperation. They thought they'd scare me into submission, but I'd anticipated this. By midday, Karen and 3 board members returned, her clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched like a general on a battlefield. They thought they'd already won. I leaned against my porch railing, coffee in hand, ready for round 2. Karen didn't mince words. Mr. Harrison, I'm giving you one final chance to comply voluntarily before we escalate further. The sand needs to go now. I took a slow sip. I'd love to help, Karen, but I kinda like the new look. Adds character, don't you think? Her jaw tightened. This isn't a joke. The HOA has authority to enforce standards. This is a blatant violation. I scrolled to the rule book on my phone. Nowhere does it ban landscaping my own driveway. I've just made a simple modification. A short, balding board member piped up. This isn't in the spirit of the guidelines. I grinned. Funny, when you took my driveway for public parking, I don't recall anyone caring about the spirit of the community. Karen's face flushed. You're creating an obstruction. It's still a driveway, I said, glancing at the sand. Just tougher to park on. Maybe people should use their own spaces. She inhaled sharply, barely containing herself. We'll see how funny you think this is when we take legal action. Go ahead, I replied, but I've talked to a lawyer. If you fine me for something not in your rules, I'll countersue for harassment and illegal property seizure. The board members swapped nervous looks. Karen huffed, turned on her heel, and marched off. This isn't over. I watched them go, knowing I'd won this round, but the war was just heating up. The HOA didn't waste time striking back. The next day, flyers appeared in mailboxes neighborhood-wide, branding me a menace with reckless disregard for community order. They accused me of sabotaging HOA policies and undermining neighborhood values, complete with a photo of my sandpit like it was a crime scene. The smear campaign was meant to turn everyone against me, but it backfired spectacularly. My phone buzzed with messages from neighbors who found it hilarious. Some even stopped by to cheer me on. Jeff, an older guy from down the street, knocked on my door, grinning. Man, you've got guts. No one ever pushed back this far against those clowns. I laughed. Someone had to. He shook his head. You've started something. People are sick of the HOA's nonsense. This might be what we needed. He was right. That weekend, defiance spread like wildfire. My next-door neighbor swapped his lawn for a rock garden. Another painted their mailbox bright orange, daring the HOA to react. Flamingos lined one yard, and a sign reading, "This property is not an HOA puppet," popped up across the street. The HOA was losing its grip, and they knew it. Karen scrambled to regain control, issuing violation notices left and right, but it only fueled the rebellion. People were fed up. Her overreach had pushed them too far. She showed up at my house again, this time with a new tactic, a forced smile and a fake reasonable tone. Mr. Harrison, I think we can compromise, she said, swallowing her pride. I raised an eyebrow. Oh, now you want a compromise? She nodded. If you remove the sandpit, we'll rescind the fines and discuss reasonable alternatives. I leaned against my porch railing, pretending to mull it over. Interesting offer, Karen, but I'll pass. Her smile twitched. Let be rational. Oh, I am, I grinned, and I'm having too much fun watching you squirm. Her mask dropped, eyes narrowing. You'll regret this, I shrugged. We'll see. She stormed off, and I knew she was running out of moves. The neighborhood was rallying, the HOA flailing, and I stood firm. Then came her final gambit. A thick letter arrived, steeped in legal jargon, dripping with intimidation. The HOA was suing me. They claimed my unauthorized landscaping violated community standards and damaged neighborhood integrity, demanding the sand's removal and $10,000 for harm to property values. I read it twice, shaking my head at the absurdity. They thought legal threats would break me, but I was ready. I called Tom. "They're suing me," I said. He chuckled. "For their own screw-up. Typical. They've got no case. They're banking on you panicking." "They assume wrong," I replied, fight surging inside me. "What's next?" Tom laid it out. Get a lawyer, counter their bluff, turn the tables. I contacted a specialist in HOA cases and explained everything. He laughed. "They've got no leg to stand on. They can't claim damages for property they do own, and their rules don't ban what you did. Let them go to court, you'll win, and we can countersue for harassment." Music to my ears. The lawsuit moved forward, but instead of settling, I filed my own counterclaim. Illegal property seizure, unjustified fines, targeted harassment. My lawyer detailed every dirty trick, the sudden rule change, the bogus fines, the smear campaign. This wasn't just about my driveway anymore. It was about whether the HOA could bully homeowners into submission. Word spread fast. By the court date, the neighborhood buzzed, people whispering, speculating. The courtroom was packed. Karen sat with their lawyer, smug and self-assured. I sat with mine, calm and ready. Their attorney launched into a dramatic spiel about community order and standards, painting me as a chaos-sowing troublemaker. When our turn came, my lawyer dismantled them piece by piece. He flashed my deed, proof my driveway was private property beyond their reach. "The HOA has no legal basis to designate it public," he said. Then he held up their rulebook. "Show me where it bans landscaping modifications." Karen fumbled when the judge asked why I wasn't notified of the change. The knockout blow? My lawyer challenged her to cite a bylaw allowing fines for my sandpit. She stammered, shuffled papers, and admitted there wasn't one. The judge's face stayed neutral, but I knew we'd won before the gavel fell. The courtroom tension hung thick as the judge deliberated, but the HOA's case was already crumbling. Karen's smugness faded with every fumbled answer, her lawyer grasping at straws. When the ruling came, it was a clean sweep. The judge dismissed their lawsuit outright, declaring the HOA had overstepped its authority. No evidence supported their claim that my sandpit violated enforceable rules or damaged property values. Then came the real victory. He ruled in favor of my countersuit. The HOA had to drop all fines, issue a public retraction of their accusations, and pay damages for harassment, $15,000, more than they'd sought from me. The gavel hit and hushed murmurs erupted. Karen's face twisted like she'd swallowed glass. Her lawyer scribbled notes, avoiding eye contact. I leaned back, letting relief wash over me. My lawyer clapped my shoulder. "They picked the wrong guy to mess with," I grinned. "Damn right." Outside, the neighborhood practically threw a party. People mocked the HOA's flop. Some jokingly threatened to turn their driveways into sandpits too. Karen tried damage control, issuing a stiff statement about reviewing procedures, but it was too late. She'd lost her grip. Within days, a petition circulated to oust her as president, signatures piling up faster than sand in my driveway. She fought it, clinging to power, but the vote was brutal. Over 80% booted her out. Weeks later, she and her husband sold their house, fleeing the humiliation. With Karen gone, the HOA scrambled to save face. The new board, chastened by the backlash, repealed the absurd parking rule, restoring my driveway to its rightful status. Mine. The sandpit stayed a bit longer, a middle finger to the old regime, before I cleared it for a fully enclosed garage. No more parking nonsense, no more HOA overreach. Life settled after that. One day, a new family moved in nearby and stopped by to say hi. After small talk, the husband glanced at my pristine driveway. "Heard there was some parking drama around here," he said, grinning. I chuckled. "Oh yeah, but it's over now." His wife smirked. "Good to know, wouldn't want an HOA war." "Trust me," I said, "that's not a problem anymore." The battle was done. I'd stood my ground, fought back, and won. Better yet, the neighborhood woke up. The HOA's days of unchecked power were finished, all thanks to a truckload of sand and a refusal to bend. But the aftermath lingered in subtle ways. Neighbors who'd once nodded politely now stopped to chat, some even thanking me for shaking things up. Jeff, the guy who'd cheered my guts, dropped off a beer one evening. "You didn't just save your driveway," he said. "You gave us all a backbone." The ripple effect spread beyond mail. Local news picked up the story. Homeowners' sandpit rebellion topples HOA tyranny, and it sparked chatter online. People from other towns shared their own HOA horror stories, some asking how I'd pulled it off. A lawyer friend told me my case was being cited in HOA reform discussions, proof small victories could shift bigger tides. The new board kept things low-key after Karen's exit, focusing on potholes and pool hours instead of petty power trips. My garage went up without a peep from them, a sleek, sand-free fortress. I'd park my truck, close the door, and feel a quiet triumph every time. The HOA still existed, but it was a shadow of its former self, wary, humbled, and far less eager to flex. One sunny afternoon, Tom swung by, leaning on his cane. "Heard Karen's living in a condo downtown now," he said, smirking. "Probably terrorizing their board instead," I laughed. "Better them than us." He nodded at my garage. "Nice work, kid. You didn't just win, you rewrote the rules." He was right. The sandpit was gone, but its legacy stuck. Kids still talked about the beach driveway, and neighbors grinned when they passed my house. It wasn't just about reclaiming my space. It was about proving the HOA only had power if we let it. That night, I sat on my porch, beer in hand, watching the street settle into dusk. No cars clogged my driveway, no yellow lines marred my property. It was mine again, fully, undeniably, and the neighborhood felt freer for it. The war was over, and we'd all come out stronger. The quiet that followed the HOA's defeat wasn't just a relief, it was a shift. My driveway, now crowned with a sleek garage, stood as a silent monument to the fight, but the real change was in the air. Neighbors who'd once kept to themselves started lingering longer when they passed by. One morning, the woman who'd swapped her lawn for a rock garden waved me over. "You lit a match under us," she said, gesturing to her jagged stone patch. "They sent me a violation notice, but I told M to shove it, cited your case. Haven't heard back since." I grinned. "Glad to help," she nodded. "We're not scared of them anymore." That was it, the fear was gone. The HOA's old tricks, the fines and threats, didn't land the same way. People had seen them lose, and it stuck. The new board kept their heads down, licking wounds from Karen's reign. They approved my garage permit without a fuss. First time I'd ever dealt with them that didn't end in a shouting match. Meetings shrank from battlegrounds to quick check-ins, trash schedules, pool repairs, no grandstanding about community standards. Jeff stopped by one evening with another beer, plopping down on my porch steps. "Heard they're rewriting the bylaws," he said. "Nothing about driveways or parking zones, just basic stuff." "Guess they learned their lesson." I cracked open the bottle. "Took long enough," he smirked. "Yeah, well, you made it impossible to forget. That sandpit's a legend now." Kids still asked about it. Lily from across the street even drew a picture of it for school, calling it the beach that beat the bad guys. I pinned it on my fridge, a goofy badge of honor. Word of the saga spread beyond mail, popping up in odd places. A buddy texted me a link to a podcast dissecting HOA overreach. My case got a whole segment, dubbed the Sandpit Standoff. Callers chimed in with their own stories, some inspired to push back where they lived. Then came a letter from a guy in Nevada. "Saw your story online. My HOA tried to find me for a shed, quoted your win to shut him down. Worked like a charm. Thanks, man." I showed it to Tom over coffee. He chuckled, tapping his cane on the floor. "You're a folk hero now, Harrison. Didn't see that coming when you ordered that sand, huh?" "Not even close," I admitted. "Thought I'd just piss M off, not start a movement." He leaned back. "Sometimes pissing M off is how it starts. You gave people a playbook. Stand up, get loud, don't blink." The legal fallout wrapped up cleaner than I'd expected. The $15,000 from the HOA hit my account, paid for the garage and a new grill with some left over for a rainy day. Karen's exit left a void the board couldn't fill fast. Whispers said she'd tried running for her new condo's HOA but got laughed out of the room. Her old house sold to a quiet couple who kept to themselves. No flamingos or sandpits, just a tidy lawn and a wave now and then. The neighborhood settled into a rhythm I hadn't known since moving in, peaceful but alive. One Saturday, the rock garden lady hosted a barbecue and half the street showed up. No HOA flyers, no violation notices, just burgers, beers, and kids running wild. Jeff raised his drink my way. "To the guy who buried the bastards in sand." Laughter rippled through the crowd, and I toasted back, feeling the weight of it, not just a win, but a bond. That bond deepened over months. When a storm knocked a tree onto the orange mailbox guy's roof, a dozen of us pitched in to clear it. No HOA crew needed. Tom called it the sandpit effect. We'd learned to rely on each other, not some clipboard tyrant. The board sent a timid rep to a community meeting once asking for input on a new playground. No one yelled, we just told M what we wanted. Swings, slides, no nonsense rules. They nodded and made it happen. It was weird almost, seeing the HOA as a tool instead of a tyrant, but it worked. My driveway stayed mine, the garage door humming shut each night like a quiet victory bell. The fight had changed us, not just me but all of us, into something stronger, less afraid, more connected. And it all traced back to that truckload of sand, a crazy idea that turned out to be the sanest thing I'd ever done. The neighborhood's new rhythm held steady as seasons shifted, less tension, more trust. My garage stood as a quiet sentinel, but the real proof of change was in the small stuff. One crisp fall day, Lily's dad from across the street dropped by with a spare pumpkin from their patch. "Figured you'd want one for the porch," he said, grinning. "No HOA rule against it now." I took it, chuckling. "Guess we're safe." He nodded at my driveway. "Still can't believe you pulled that off." Kids won't shut up about the sandbox guy. It wasn't just talk. Kids carved sandpit-themed jack-o'-lanterns that Halloween, a goofy nod to the rebellion. I set mine out front, glowing next to the pumpkin he'd given me, and watched neighbors snap photos, laughing. The HOA didn't dare send a notice. They'd learned to pick their battles. Tom kept me updated on the board's quiet overhaul. "They're scared of another Harrison," he said one afternoon, sipping coffee on my porch. "Bylaws are down to bare bones, no more community resource crap. You spooked M good." I smirked. "Good keeps M honest." He tapped his cane, eyes glinting. "Honest's a stretch, but they're tame now. Your wind's still echoing. Heard a guy 2 towns over dumped gravel on his lot when his HOA tried a parking grab, cited you in court and won." I raised an eyebrow. "Seriously? Dead serious? You're a ghost story for HOA tyrants now." The thought stuck with me. My sandpit hadn't just saved my driveway. It was a warning shot rippling out, giving others a spine to stand on. That echo hit closer to home, too. Jeff organized a block cleanup, no HOA mandate, just neighbors pitching in. We raked leaves, patched fences, swapped stories over coffee someone brought in a thermos. The orange mailbox guy, Mike, hauled a ladder to fix a loose gutter for the new couple in Corinne's old place. "Feels good doing it ourselves," he said, wiping sweat off his brow. "No fines hanging over us." I nodded, tossing leaves into a pile. "That's the difference, our rules, not theirs." By dusk, the street looked sharper than it ever had under HOA rain, and we didn't need a clipboard to make it happen. The board sent a rep to thank us, awkward, stumbling over words like they weren't used to gratitude. We just waved it off. This was ours now, not theirs. The legal wind's fallout faded, but its mark didn't. The $15,000 covered my garage and grill, and I socked the rest away, peace of mind money. Corinne's name popped up once in a local paper. Her condo board rejected her candidacy after someone leaked her mail fiasco. "Couldn't handle the heat here, can't handle it there," Tom quipped when I showed him. "Her own fault, pushed too hard, fell too far." I shrugged. "She's someone else's problem now." My driveway stayed pristine, no yellow lines or smug parkers. The garage door rolled shut each night, a satisfying thud that said mine, but the real prize was the neighborhood freed from her shadow, knit tighter by the fight. One evening, Lily's mom dropped off cookies, a thank you for the pumpkin swap. "You changed this place," she said. "Feels like a home now, not a rule book." I took the plate, smiling. Took all of us. The broader waves kept rolling. A law student emailed me. My case was in her thesis on HOA reform paired with calls for caps on fines and clearer property rights. "You're a precedent," she wrote. "Small but loud." I showed it to Jeff over beers. "Precedent, huh? Guess sand? Good for something." He laughed. "Better than asphalt." Online, my story bounced around forums, people swapping tips on fighting HOAs, some nicknaming me Sandman. A guy in California mailed a postcard. "Beat my board with your trick. Sand's cheaper than lawyers. Cheers." It was weird being a spark for strangers, but it fit. Mail stayed calm, the HOA a ghost of its old self. Meetings were short, dues low, projects practical, playground swings went up without a fuss. My grill fired up most weekends, neighbors drifting over with burgers or brews. We'd sit, talk, watch kids chase fireflies, no clipboard in sight. The sandpit was long gone, but its spirit lingered. A reminder we'd taken back what was ours, one grain at a time. Winter settled over mail, blanketing the neighborhood in a hush that felt earned. My garage kept the truck snow-free, a practical perk of the wind, but the real warmth came from the shift around me. One snowy afternoon, Mike with the orange mailbox shoveled my walk unasked, returned the favor from the storm cleanup. No HOA to find me for helping, he said, grinning through frost-bitten cheeks. I handed him a coffee. Good thing, sans a lousy shovel. He laughed and we stood there, steam rising, watching kids sled down the street. The HOA stayed silent, no notices about unauthorized snow piles or whatever nonsense Karen might have cooked up. The new board sent a holiday card instead, first time they'd ever done that, wishing us well, no threats attached. Tom saw it on my counter and snorted. They're trying to be human now. Your fault, Harrison. Spring brought more signs of the sandpit's legacy. The playground opened, swings, slides, a sandbox kids dubbed Harrison's Beach in my honor. At the ribbon cutting, Jeff nudged me. You're immortal now, man. I rolled my eyes, but Lily's dad snapped a photo of me with the kids, sand buckets in hand, and it ended up framed in the community center. The board kept things simple, fixed a pothole, trimmed trees, left driveways alone. Neighbors took over the rest. Mike hosted a garage sale, the rock garden lady swapped seedlings, I grilled for whoever showed up. No flyers warned us to behave, we just did our way. One night Tom hobbled over with a newspaper clipping. Karen's condo HOA had dissolved after her failed power grab. Couldn't resist stirring the pot, he said. Some people never learn, I smirked. Her loss, our gain. The story's reach kept surprising me. A radio host called, wanting an interview for an HOA exposé. Sandpit guy had a ring to it, he said. I did it, keeping it short. They pushed, I pushed back harder, end of story. It aired nationwide, and my inbox pinged with more notes, people thanking me, asking advice, one guy even sending a sandbag as a gag gift. A state rep cited mail in a bill curbing HOA powers, calling it the driveway that fought back. Locally, the peace held. My garage stayed shut, my driveway mine, no yellow lines in sight. The new family down the block stopped by again, curious about the lore. Heard you took on the HOA, the husband said. That true, I nodded. Yeah, but it's old news, just live your life, they won't mess with you now, he smiled. Nice to know we picked the right street. By summer, Mail felt like a different place, not just free of Karen's rain, but alive with something better. The community center hosted a cookout, my grill joined a dozen others, smoke curling over laughter and music. Kids raced through the sandbox, adults swapped stories of the old days, the HOA a punchline instead of a threat. Jeff raised a beer. To the Sandman kept us sane. I clinked his bottle, shaking my head. To us, we did it together. Tom, leaning on his cane, chimed in. Damn right. Took one stubborn bastard and a truckload of sand to wake us up. The crowd cheered, and I felt it, not pride but belonging. The fight had started with my driveway, but it ended with this, a neighborhood that didn't need rules to thrive. The HOA limped on, a shell of its former self, dues paid for swings, not lawsuits. Our win left a mark deeper than I'd planned. Online, Sandpit Standoff trended now and then, a DIY blueprint for pushing back. Here it was simpler. We lived freer, leaned on each other, let the petty tyrants fade. One evening I sat on my porch, grill cooling, watching fireflies blink over the street. Lily pedaled by, waving, her dad trailing with a grin. No fines, no battles, just home. The sand was gone, the garage stood firm, and the yellow lines were a memory scrubbed clean. I'd fought for my space, but we'd won something bigger, a place where power came from us, not them. All it took was a crazy idea, a load of sand, and a neighborhood ready to stand up. The war was over, and we'd built something lasting in its place.